You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Get ready to expand your mind. This is Psychology's Outer Limits with your host, Professor of Psychology, Erick R. Williams.
Well, hello there, folks, and welcome to the premiere edition of Psychology's Outer Limits. And I am your host, Professor Erick Williams, Professor of Psychology, as the title implies. And good evening to you folks on the East Coast. That's where I'm located, in Maryland. And good afternoon to those of you on the West Coast. And hello to the rest of you wherever you are. There's a lot of ways to interact with the show. So before I explain the show a little bit, let's do that. First of all, the show is live if it's 7 o'clock Eastern Time, or if it's 4 o'clock on the West Coast, then we're live, so you can call in. And if you want to call in, the phone number is 888-919-2355. You can Twitter at Erick Psychology. My name is spelled E-R-I-C-K, a C and a K. That's a bit French. So that's Erick Psychology on Twitter, or at Inception Radio Network, and they are at I_R_N_IRN. You can email livepsych@mail.com. So it's just the word live, L-I-V-E, the word psych, P-S-Y-C, but it's all one word, livepsych@mail.com. You're probably listening to us on Inception Radio Network, but you can also download the Android or the iOS apps if you want to listen on the phone or on your tablet. And also, if you happen to be on the page, you'll notice that there's a menu bar, and if you click on the one that says chat, you can join in the chat. Lots of great people. I've been in that chat room a lot myself when I've listened to shows and when I've been guest on shows. So by all means, jump in. I'll be monitoring it, and our exceptional producer, MJ, will also be monitoring it. And on Facebook, you can search for Psychology's Outer Limits. Psychology, I don't know. When I type too fast, I misspell it, but it's not IES. It's just psychology with an S, then outer, O-U-T-E-R, and then limits. Okay. And I think that's about every way to get a hold of us. But by all means, call in, 888-919-2355. I'm so used to a classroom full of faces, and instead I'm sitting here staring at three screens. So I'm hoping for a very interactive show. I am a professor of psychology. I've been doing that for about 9 years now. And no, I don't teach at Harvard or Yale or Stanford or any of those really big, giant places. I actually have a strong preference for small colleges. So I'm at Hagerstown Community College. It's a sprawling, bucolic, Saturday Evening Post kind of college. It's rather big. I really enjoy it there. I teach about 7 classes a semester. That's about a little over 200 students. And I teach everything. I teach general psych, and I teach abnormal psych, which is a lot of fun. It's a hard course, though. It's pretty much for psych majors. Human growth and development, social psych, which is a lot of fun, lots of discussion. I teach a counseling course that's actually for a different group, but it has to be taught by someone, I guess, with a counseling background. And I actually have taught at one of those bigger colleges, but that was a while ago. I was teaching graduate students how to do group counseling. And that was fun. I did that for about 4 years, but I was an adjunct. Now I'm a full-time professor. And that's a little bit about me. Now let's talk about the show a little bit. If you go to the main page, to Inception Radio Network, and you'll count, including me, 29 hosts, though one of them says coming soon. And you'll notice, especially the regulars, that the network is primarily about paranormal things. And this show is not primarily about paranormal things, but we're going to go there. We're going to go to that end of the pool and dip our toes in every once in a while. But psychology has its own weirdness, so I promise you weirdness. Weirdness is cool. So when I think it was Bob who came up with the name Psychology's Outer Limits, because I'm not quite that clever. I do want to talk about some of the outer limits, the odd things in psychology. I want to talk about psychology in the news. And I want to have sort of a topic of the day. And we're starting out as an hour show, and we'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, it may morph into an hour-and-a-half show. This show is live on Sunday nights from 7 to 8, and maybe eventually 8:30. But then at 9 o'clock, we have Pang, P-A-N-G. And that's actually hosted by MJ, our producer. I didn't even know that. I love his show. I listen to Inception Radio a lot. As a matter of fact, when I was trying to decide where to have a show, I sent sort of I don't know what to call it, a letter of introduction, I guess. It's to 3 networks, and IRN was the friendliest and the most outgoing, and took lots of time to explain how it would work. So I ended up here. So that's kind of the format of the show. But what I really enjoy is the same thing I enjoy in the classroom. I enjoy people, talking. You don't want to just listen to me for an hour. If you're one of my students, you might have to listen. Our summer classes are 4 hours. Can you imagine that? I have to talk for 4 hours and they have to listen. But it's a great deal more fun when people ask questions. And students come up with questions that, I mean, my gosh, next year will make 40 years since I started, since I was a freshman at Maryland. So I know a lot about psychology, but students come up with questions that are incredible, and I wish I would have thought of them. And I hope you call in with questions. You can call in with questions. You can call in with your thoughts, your experience. You can call in to say hi. You can call in to say, well, so far you suck, but I think with time you'll get better. Or you could call in with an exception. Every time I provide a factoid to my students, somebody raises their hand. And there's always an exception. So now we have what I call Professor Erick's 70% rule, which I made up. Keep that in mind. There's no research behind this. You can reasonably believe that about 70% of the time, something psychological I tell you is true. And it's probably more than that, but I want to be conservative. So most of the things I tell you on here are true most of the time. But my gosh, of course, there's going to be plenty of exceptions. And one of the things that's always interesting to me, and I love talking about it in class, is basic research. In basic research, this is the stuff that makes you absolutely crazy when you read the paper. For example, you read a headline, NIH scientists spend $2.6 million proving that fruit flies like fruit. And you smack yourself on the forehead and you say, for God's sake, of course they like fruit. That's why they're called fruit flies. Well, that's not really the point. Basic research helps us to generate more questions, first of all. But second of all, everything in science has to be proven, even that fruit flies like fruit. Another reason that we study basic things and we study obvious things is that sometimes we're just wrong. There's a very common notion, for example, that opposites attract, but it's been studied a lot in social psychology, and it's not true. Opposites do not attract. I remember the 70% rule. Once in a while they do, but when they do, the stats for the outcomes are pretty miserable. By and large, we like being with and around people that are very, very similar to us. So speaking of things that we hear often that we believe, I came across this article called Divorce Shocker. Most marriages do make it. Now, as far back as I can remember, I have heard that 50% of marriages fail. That's a big number. And if you're getting ready to get married, that's a depressing number. No wonder we have people signing agreements before they get married because they're afraid they're going to lose half their stuff. And you might anyway, I don't know. But anyway, I think they're a husband and wife research team. Shante Feldhahn, I can't pronounce these names. Anyway, she did go to one of the big colleges. She did her research training at Harvard, and she and her husband, Jeff, are marriage counselors. But they were kind of curious about this 50% thing, too. And this was on CNN, by the way. And one of the things that they found was that they couldn't find the source for this data. They couldn't find it. Usually, when you're writing an academic paper, you can't make a statement of fact without finding some piece of research where someone proved it. Remember what I said earlier? Everything in science has got to be proven. So what they did was they very painstakingly went through real data. I'm not sure what they did, but I'm assuming they went through, county databases for divorces and for marriages. And what they found is that, this is for first-time marriages, that probably 20 to 25% have ended in divorce on average. And we've never been anywhere near 50%. So here's an example where, basic research tells us that something that many of us have believed forever isn't true. The divorce rate is not 50%. But I've certainly believed it, and I am sure that even after what I just said, there are folks that will still believe it. And the divorce rate has been dropping. As a matter of fact, in one of the courses I teach, I was showing a graph that showed that the divorce rate had dropped. It had dropped 20%, but not 20% of all marriages. It had dropped from some number to a number or another number, and the difference between those two numbers was 20%. But the point is that the divorce rate is dropping, and I think that's good. As a counselor, I think that's a great sign. And some states even have these new kind of marriages now, where you agree that you will not, you sort of waive your right to a no-fault marriage. It's very hard to get married. And that sort of brings us back to this 50% stat. This may have come about in the early 70s when the no-fault divorce came out, and psychologists predicted that it would lead to a 50% divorce rate. But apparently it never did, but the number stuck. So that explains a few things. That explains why we do basic research, and certainly in social psychology, we spend a lot of time talking about, things that are I don't know, folk wisdom, urban myths. I use Snopes a lot for that. Do you use Snopes? Snopes. It's a husband and wife team that work out of their house and they look up everything. If you hear something weird, you go to Snopes and you find out if it's true or if it's not. Now, under the topic just plain weird, I found that this week. I have no idea what this has to do with psychology, except I happen to believe everything is related to psychology. But this is just sort of a headline. I have nothing else to go with it. A German student mooned a group of Hell's Angels and hurled a puppy at them before escaping on a stolen bulldozer, police said. Now, first of all, I think mooning Hell's Angels, that's pretty brave. Hurling a puppy's kind of mean. But how do you escape on a stolen bulldozer? Don't Hell's Angels have really, really fast motorcycles? And I'm just guessing that they could overtake a bulldozer fairly rapidly. So I wish I had more to the story, but I don't. but that comes under the section of just plain weird. And if you have something that you want to contribute that's just plain weird, you can pop it into the chat room, or you can send an email. I'm kind of new to this, so I'm trying to look at everything at once. So I see Lisa's in the chat room. Hello, Lisa. And a few other folks. Nice to see all of you there. Let's see here. And remember, the number to call in is 888-919-2355. You don't need any particular reason to call in. You can just call in and say hi if you want. I want to go through a few more just quickie little things, and then I think our topic for today is going to be loss. Not just loss like when someone's dying, and I'm kind of sorry to start the premiere show with a death, grief, and sorrow topic, but I do want to talk about loss a little bit as our topic for today. This week in psychology, I love looking up new sort of research, what's going on out there in the world. Here's one. Hallucinations are common. Hallucinations are like waking dreams, and we tend to think of them as makers of serious mental illness. In reality, however, they are more common amongst normal people than we might imagine. 1/3 of us report having experienced hallucinations, with 20% experiencing hallucinations once a month and 2% once a week. Now, I think when most people think of hallucinations, they think of visual, because in movies, it's easier to show visual than anything else. If you saw the really great movie, A Beautiful Mind, about the mathematician, you saw visual hallucinations. But when he's interviewed, he says he never actually had a visual hallucination. All of his hallucinations were auditory. And in schizophrenia, that's common. Visual hallucinations are relatively rare. But it wouldn't make for very good TV or a movie to have voices. So they translated his hallucinations from auditory to visual. But we have 5 senses. So anytime one of your 5 senses is being misperceived by your brain, we would call that a hallucination. For example, I had a student that was schizophrenic. She had been to Afghanistan, and I guess she was there too long, and her mind snapped. That's a technical term, snapped. And she believed she had a little electronic device buried under her neck. And when she ran her finger up and down her neck, her finger would go up, across, and down. She felt a chip under her neck. So that would be a somatic or bodily hallucination. And it wouldn't matter how many times I would rub it and say, there's nothing there, she would feel it. And then I would become, part of the scheme in her mind that people are out to get her. But that's pretty interesting. I mean, that's a big statistic. 20 some percent. If you're a pot smoker and cheeseburgers taste better, well, that's actually technically a hallucination. So I think they're taking all of that into consideration. This one I thought was really interesting because to me it's kind of counterintuitive. Fantasies reduce motivation. Isn't that interesting? One way people commonly motivate themselves is by using fantasies about the future. You've heard people say, imagine that you've taken the test and you've gotten an A, or imagine that you're finished bench pressing the 5,000 pounds, or whatever it is. Fantasize about it. So the notion is that if you dream about a positive future, you'll motivate it. But psychologists have found, now they don't say which psychologist or where, and that's kind of a red flag, but we'll go with it. Psychologists have found that fantasizing about future success is actually bad for motivation. It seems that getting a taste of the future in the here and now reduces the drive to achieve it. fantasies also fail to flag up the problems we're likely to face on the way to our goals. And I think what they're saying is that if you over-fantasize about the future, in a way, you feel like you've already done it, so why do it? You know. On the other hand, we tend to think of anxiety as kind of a bad thing. So, and it can be, but anxiety also makes us do things. So while fantasizing that you've passed the test may make you study less, a little anxiety is good because it makes you nervous. It makes you get up and go over to the books and start looking. A question here from Lisa K. Would sense memory count as hallucinations? Thinks like thinking of chocolate and very clearly smelling it even though it's not there. Yes, that would count as a hallucination. And that's a great example, and I hadn't even thought of that. You just suddenly start smelling something. And what we have there is we have perception without sensation. The sensation would be the sensory molecules coming off the chocolate. And then your brain has to make sense of sensation, and that's perception. So yes, that would definitely count. You ever walk into a room and smell something and you feel like you're almost violently yanked back into the past? You're suddenly in your second grade classroom, or you're in your grandmother's house or something. Our sense of smell is literally physically close to the piece of our brain that takes care of long-term memories. And it seemed, and this probably goes back, the 400 and some, I guess we've been around for about 400,000 years, but we have this piece of memory called the hippocampus. It's responsible for creating long-term memories. And our olfactory bulbs for smelling is the only sense that projects directly into the brain, and it projects very closely to that. And, to me, I think that would count as a hallucination, too, because you're not in your grandmother's house, and you're not back in your second grade classroom. So excellent question, Lisa. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see. Anything else in here interesting? Let's see. This is a thinking outside the box. Now, see, I happen to think brainstorming is great, and I do a brainstorming exercise with my class. And what I do is that they have to think of as many ways as possible to come up with $50 in cash in 24 hours. And the rule of the game is you don't have $50. And I don't actually make them do this, by the way. I like the idea, especially if they had to give me the $50. But we start out with all the easy stuff, go pawn something, borrow it. But we usually end up with about 100 ideas because one idea reminds someone of another idea. So I am a fan of brainstorming. But at least there's some research that says that brainstorming in groups, people in groups tend to be lazy, likely to forget their ideas while others talk. Well, we always have that. I really think what they're talking about there is something called social loafing. When you have a group effort, you have a handful or a large group of people that are assigned to work on a task, and I am sure all of you have experienced this. There's going to be one or two or more people that aren't going to help. And that's called social loafing. But I think that if you've got, a good leader and you have a motivated group, then brainstorming does work. But I do get their point that, you have to sort of keep your eye out for social loafing. And then this one's not surprising. This is some basic research. Trying to suppress your thoughts is counterproductive. If I tell you right now, do not think about a white elephant. Under no circumstances may you think about a white elephant. So what you thinking about right now? You're thinking about a white elephant. That's just the way we're wired. It's not good advice to suppress your thoughts because our brain seems to want to fight back, and I don't know why. If you're an anxious person, what makes more sense is to let the anxious thought or visual pass by you as if it were a movie. and simply don't interact with it. Just let it go by. But if you tell yourself, don't think this, then it doesn't seem to work very well. Anyway, that's the news for this week from the world of psychology. Now, when I have been interviewed, people have asked me, you know, what is going on in the world of academia for abnormal psychology or paranormal, and not much. And the reason given most often is that, you know, nothing paranormal ever seems to happen in a lab. Does that mean that paranormal stuff and abnormal stuff doesn't happen? No, it doesn't mean that at all. I think it means one of two things. Either the paranormal does not lend itself to the lab, and that's certainly possible, or the methodologies are wrong. And we just got to do it differently. I certainly wouldn't give up on it, but I think I may have, well, I gave a right and wrong answer when I was interviewed. I still don't believe that there are any current academic degrees, at least at any accredited universities, for paranormal psychology or the paranormal in general. Stanford was doing stuff until the 80s. Duke was doing stuff only until the 60s. Princeton was working on paranormal until 2007. Harvard as late as 2008. Let's see. Now, but there is some good news. The University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, they're still doing research in paranormal. With 6 years of research in the area of past lives already under its belt, UVA's Division of Perceptual Studies, which is part of the Department of Psychiatric Medicine, is still up and running, and they're exploring phenomena such as reincarnation, most specifically through its focus on children who claim to remember past lives, and near-death experiences, as well as apparitions, after-death communication, altered state of consciousness, and other stuff. I don't think you can get a degree in it, but it's nice to see that they're still doing it. The University of Arizona still has some programs they're doing in after-death communication and discarnate entities, which would include spirit guides, angels, divine higher power, things like that, all under a program called Sophia. Interesting name. What else do we got here? Cornell University was doing stuff until 2010. And then if we go across the pond, the University of Edinburgh has a, well, they must have a program because they have a chair of parapsychology. That started in '85. And they have an interdisciplinary approach to parapsychology. So they're looking at phenomena such as ESP, psychokinesis, and the nature and consequence of paranormal itself. And let's see, there's another thing here for London, not interesting. The University of Adelaide, I hope I said that right. The animalistic, not animal, but as an anomaly, psychology research unit. And the University of Amsterdam is also doing anomalous cognition. So there's still research being out there. There are still, you know, credentialed, credible psychologists working on that. And I think that's because there shouldn't be a belief that these things don't exist. It's just hard. We're just not sure. You know, our brains have somewhere around 80 to 100 billion neurons, and we're not sure how they work. But I'll leave that gigantic number in your head for a moment because we need to take a break, and I will be back in just a few.
listeners. This is MJ saying hello and sharing an awesome secret I discovered. It's called dreamnuage.com. Fresh, raw, organic ingredients are used to create all their products. They are made in very small batches to ensure quality and freshness. Handmade in the USA, each product is created with care and with the finest organic ingredients. There are no preservatives, dyes, or chemicals in any product. Stop by Dream Nuage and relax. That's DREAMNUAGE.com. Simple, raw, organic.
Hello, everyone. Lorian Fenton here, host of the California MUFON radio show, asking if you'd like special access to exclusive and amazing information about UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. If you're nodding yes, then join IRN's Insider Club. As an Insider Club member, you'll get an all-access pass to premier Inception Radio Network content for only $4.99 a month. This includes live UFO and paranormal conferences, live streaming UFO skywatches, exclusive IRN radio and TV productions, and of course, paying radio with MJ and Ken Storch. So don't wait any longer. Visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com and click on Member Login to join IRN's Insider Club and get your VIP access today.
Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there. Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ. You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Hey, you still got that 80 billion to 100 billion number floating around your head. I hope it did give you a headache during the break. Welcome back to Psychology's Outer Limits. I am Professor Erick Williams, and we were just talking about academic programs in paranormal stuff. And that, as far as I could tell, I couldn't find a graduate program where you could get a degree. And I don't know of any undergraduate programs, but there's still research out there. And, you know, someone actually counted, this is interesting, this is like the 50% divorce rate. You know, every textbook I have says we have 100 billion neurons, but somebody actually did a pretty good count, and it might be closer to 80 billion, but what's 20 billion among friends? Anyway, you know, so you have these 80 to 100 billion neurons, and every neuron is directly or indirectly talking to at least 50,000 other neurons. That is unimaginable computing power. Now, our neurons work like little tiny batteries, and they're actually more like capacitors if you're into electronics, but they're on and off, and they turn on and off by squirting out a little bit of a liquid, a neurotransmitter. And if you put sensors on your head, if you've ever had an EEG, You can see the activity in different parts of the brain. But there's an important point there. You got to glue those things on really tight because we're not exactly transmitting a great distance. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't. And of all the things in the paranormal that I think is the most possible, and keep in mind, you're listening to a hopeful skeptic. I like the idea of all this stuff, but I'm a scientist at heart. I want evidence and I want reliability, meaning I want it to happen over and over again. But I do believe that as we evolved, at some point our brain will figure out how to transfer information to another brain. I mean, my gosh, we have so much computing power, and there isn't really a machine yet that can do original thinking. Even though Stephen Hawking, the famous astrophysicist, believes that within a not too long period of time that some form of sentient, meaning that knows it's alive, machine life is going to take us over, send us off to other planets. I don't know. I just don't know. The brain is so complicated, and it can do so much. A computer can do what it's told to do. It can run lines of code. It's hard. I don't know how to make of course, I'm not a programmer, but for a computer to come up with something original, it would need to do that without someone already telling it. But, we come up with original things all of the time. So I'm glad that there are programs out there that are still studying paranormal stuff. And I hope they figure out the methodology because, it is possible. One of the problems we have in studying this is that, there's three things in science that are really important. One is the experimental method. If you hear that someone has used the experimental method, what that means is that they can make a causal statement. They can say A caused B. And they can say that because they eliminated everything else that could have otherwise explained it. So, for example, when I was doing my first master's, I was curious which neuropathway Xanax worked in. So, the experiment took a year, but when I was done, I was able to say something we probably already knew, that it worked through the GABAergic pathway. But I could say that Xanax causes a reduction in anxiety by being mediated through this particular pathway. So we want strong connections between A and B, and we want to eliminate other explanations. The second is that we want we want a test or anything we want to be valid, and valid means it does what it says it's going to do. I could write an IQ test, and it could turn out that really all it measures is how clever you are or how much you know. But an IQ test should measure how much you can know, kind of like a speedometer on a car. Your car can, if let's say that your speedometer goes to 120, and that's how fast your car can go. So we'll say that's your IQ. Doesn't mean you'll ever use it all, but that's how fast you could go. So valid means it does what it says it's going to do. And maybe the most important one is reliability. So let's say I come up with this really cool test for an IQ, and it's valid. It does test IQ. Now I have to prove reliability, which means that if I keep giving people this test, I'll keep getting roughly the same scores. They'll be clustered close together. And I think reliability is where we run into problems with the paranormal. Someone will announce that, they knew. I was listening to some guy on one of the radio shows the other night that said he knew 2 years ahead of time that the Twin Towers were going to be hit by the airplanes. But my first thought was, well, did you also predict 1,000 other things that didn't happen? And that's where reliability comes in. If you can make me a list of, 100 things that are going to happen, in the next X years, and the vast majority of them happen, I'd be impressed. That would be reliability. But what happens is that we don't have reliability. We hear about the successes. What we don't hear about is that is the failures. That something didn't work. So reliability is very, very important, and that's one of the methodologies that I think they struggle the most with in the labs, is trying to catch on to a way of finding a psychic that is reliable, that most of their stuff comes true. We do get very excited when we find out. I heard a story about a psychic who very precisely took police to where the body of a child was. But again, I'm a skeptic. My other thought was, well, how many times did she do that and they didn't find a body? So, but we're going to get there. We're going to figure it out, because our brains are too cool, too smart, too fast. I think there's a song in there. I don't know. One of you write it, make some money, and then just send me just a little bit of it, okay? Because it was my idea after a while. So what that brings us to is the notion of critical thinking, and I really beat my students up on this. Critical thinking means, first of all, that we think critically. It's kind of self-defining. If someone gives you a fact, who is that person? Are they in a position to give you that fact? If someone gives you a medical fact, are they a doctor, or are they in the medical field? Are they trained to give you that fact? What's their source? What's the research behind it? So first of all, we want to know who the person is telling us this stuff, and we want to know why it's true. We want them to give us their source. And hello, caller, what's your name and what's up? I believe we have a caller. Okay, well, I think we'll try one more time. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello. All right, well, we'll try again in maybe another moment or so. Maybe our producer can help fix this up. And we also have to okay, let's see. I lost my train of thought with the caller. Okay. Well, anyway. Okay, so who said it? Why did they say it? Well, what is their source? And the last thing is, we have to have an open mind. We have to be willing to be wrong. There's nothing wrong in being wrong. Because once you learn something, now you own that fact, and now you're right. A good critical thinker is very curious about why somebody holds an opposing point of view. And I also think good critical thinkers are not terribly interested in changing someone else's mind. There's a lot of hot button topics out there. My gosh, there's gay marriage, there's abortion, there's all kinds of stuff out there. There's capital punishment. And I tell my students, before you argue against something, I think you should be able to argue the other person's point of view as well as they can. And then you might find that some of their arguments are compelling. Someone's pointing out here that they saw on the news where a rat was trained in front of a video flight. Oh, yeah, I heard about this. This is what really sort of happened, is they took about 20 or 25,000 neurons from a rat brain, and they connected it to the flight controls of, I forget, it was a fighter jet. And they provided feedback to these neurons. In other words, if the plane was tilting left, then right it. And if it's tilting right, then left it. And if it's nose up, So actually what this rat does is these 25,000 rat brains started growing connections. And it was able to keep a fighter jet doing straight and level flight. And once again, that's only 25,000 neurons. That's not 80 billion or 100 billion. So yeah, I did see that, and I'm glad you brought that. I think it's Neutron brought that up. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a cool news thing, and this is what students usually do. They bring up stuff I wish I'd thought of. I think that this will become more and more sophisticated, and someday you'll find yourself playing video games against clumps of neurons from rats. Rats are great. My son Jameson has a rat in his room. I've got a rat in here. They're very smart. They're extremely social. They're very clean. And as far as I can tell, they are omnivorous. All right. So anyway, I wanted to spend a little bit of time here on. I do have a paranormal topic I wanted to bring up here. Now, some of you probably, or maybe a lot of you already know this, because a lot of you really know a lot about the paranormal. And you've devoted a lot of time, and you're very passionate about it, and I admire that passion. So anyway, this is called Creepy Charlie. Charlie's challenge spreads across Twitter as children urge each other to summon Mexican demon. So basically, how this works is players draw a cross on a piece of paper and write words such as yes or no and the divisions of the cross. And then they place two pencils on it with one balance on the other. And to begin the game, they must ask Mexican Demon Charlie, seems like an odd name for a Mexican demon, if they can play. And if the pencil points to yes, then Charlie is given the go-ahead. And then they ask questions. I suppose this is a kind of a Ouija board sort of thing. I don't know. The challenge is a ritual that allegedly makes it possible to contact a ghost. Charlie, described as a Mexican demon, will then answer questions. Children and teens have begun playing the game, which requires just a pencil and piece of paper, and posting video of it on social media. The newest fad for children and teenagers has tried to summon a Mexican demon. The so-called Charlie Challenge is described as a supernatural ritual that allegedly makes it possible to contact a ghost. Apparently, when they interview some of these kids, they're fairly freaked out by it. They thought it would just be a laugh, and they get results that some of them find frightening. I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that? Is this just another sort of portal thing? I mean, I hear a lot of people describe the Ouija board as a portal. I'd be curious what you think, and I'm sure some of you have read about this as well. Certainly a lot cheaper than buying a Ouija board. Could a listener, could an impending sense of doom before and during a panic attack be considered a hallucination? Boy, that's a good one. See, I'd have to connect that to one of the five senses. So it's not tasting or smelling, or it's probably somatic, because during panic attacks, people literally feel like they're going to die. And in a way, that impending sense of doom could be a kind of precognition. It's an excellent question. I don't have an excellent answer, but I'm glad you asked it. It's a good question. And I am curious to hear what people know about the Charlie game. I think that's kind of neat. I do want to remind people that you can call in on 888-919-2355. That's 888-919-2355. Or you can jump into the chat room, or you can email livepsych@mail.com. And if I get your emails after the show, I will do my best to answer them for you. And we've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to try to get a little bit to the topic of the day, and the topic is loss. Okay, so, and again, I apologize for ending on a death, grief, and sorrow note, but I'll try to think of something funny at the end. Loss is important, and when I train counselors, we spend a lot of time on this because we experience so much loss. Now, the first kind of loss that comes to mind is a death. But that might, in some ways, that might be easier is not a fair word to use, but that might be a kind of loss we can deal with better because it's so permanent. When someone dies, you don't see them anymore. The possibility of being with them is absolutely over. And I think that allows our psyche to move forward with making peace with it. You know, you don't get over someone dying. I mean, both of my parents died 5 years ago. I'm not over it, but I've made peace with it. But there are other losses which are very, very difficult for people. And two of them in particular come to mind. One is particularly bad for males, and that's loss of a job. A lot of the ego of a male is wrapped up in his job because we're still pretty old-fashioned. I bet a majority of males still feel that, you know, their job is to bring home the bacon. And if you're suddenly not bringing home the bacon, there can be quite a drop in self-esteem. You know, self-esteem is a sort of a, if you could just give yourself one grade, you know, for how good you are doing in life, that would be your self-esteem. I have known people that have been unemployed for lengthy periods of time and not told anybody. And I had a colleague once, he left where I was working and he went somewhere else to work. And I don't know if he got laid off or fired. Fortunately for him, he and his wife had completely separate finances. Now, we were all in our 30s back then. He got up every morning, put on a suit, and drove off to nowhere. And as soon as he thought she was gone, he drove back home. Since he usually got home before her, she wasn't surprised. Now, I don't know, I lost track. I don't know how long that worked, but the shame he felt over losing his job was so strong that he was willing to go through this charade of pretending to go to work. When we tell someone we've lost our job, we often feel shame. And, you know, some of that energy would be better spent, looking for another job. But we have to grieve. There's no shortcut. There's no magic bullet. You have to grieve a loss, and you have to grieve the loss of a job. If you lose your job on Friday, I don't think that you should be, hoping you're employed on Monday. I mean, you will need a little bit of time. But then the best thing to do to distract yourself from the loss of the old job is go out and look for a new one. Then the other kind of loss is when we lose someone that we love. And then here I'm talking about the end of a relationship or a marriage. And I'm talking about the person that wished that the relationship had not ended. And if we connect this back to what I was talking about earlier, people, when someone dies, you're not going to see that person. There's no hope. But when someone leaves you, they're still alive, they're still out there, and people have fantasies about the person being with someone else or fantasies that they're going to come back to them. Some of that's normal, and if it goes on too long, then we feel like maybe they could use a little help, perhaps some counseling. I always tell people that to the extent it's possible, when someone leaves you, or even when you leave them, to help them, is to have, no contact with them at all for probably at least 3 months. Other counselors would have other numbers. I think a year would be even better. But, you have to treat it a little bit like a death. It's not fair to keep trying to bring that person back because they deserve to find someone that they love, and you deserve to find someone that loves you. So losing a job, losing a relationship, those are important losses. But there's other losses, the loss of a dream. We may decide that we've gotten to the point that there's something we are not going to be able to do. We're not going to get into medical school because we've reached that magic age of 35 or 40 or whatever it is. Or hard as we've tried, we're just not going to be a rock star. We do well in our own backyard or regional, but it was a big dream. So the loss of a dream is another loss that has to be grieved, and we do have to grieve. For people going through the loss of someone who died, we consider normal grief to be about a year. We expect that after a year, a person is functioning pretty normally. But if a year goes by and they're really not doing much better than they were, you know, a week or 2 or 3 after the death of the person, then we call that complicated grief, and they would benefit from some help. We have a society that is very afraid of death and goes to great lengths to avoid it. I mean, look at coffins; they look like beds. You know, I don't think my bed is as comfortable as some coffins I've seen. And we don't say die. We say passed away, moved on, went to heaven. They're in a better place. I remember someone, it was a good friend, so I could kid around. They said, well, your dad's in a better place. And I said, well, what was wrong with right here? I thought this was a pretty good place. It's okay to say die and dead and death. They understand that their loved one has died. When you go up to someone and say, I'm sorry your father died, they're not going to say, what do you mean died? I thought he just moved on. And, you know, if I got my GPS out, I'd track him down. You mean he's dead? You're not going to surprise anybody. And it also helps them with the finality of it. So you're not being mean when you say died or dead or death or whatever, things like that. It's okay to say, I'm sorry to hear that your mom died, because that is exactly, you know, what happened. Okay, now, I'm not going to end on that note because that's death and grief. Are you dabbing at your eyes? I'm sorry if I did that to you. Let me end with some cool psych factoids, okay? You ready for some factoids? A placebo effect can work even when the individual is aware that the substance they are taking is a placebo. I saw this done on a video. It absolutely amazed me. They were using pain medication, and the person was told, we're going to give you a fake pain medication, and their pain went down. Humans can live longer without food than they can without sleep. Oh, that's true. Most people, you hear about these guys that play these video games for 3 and 4 days, and they stay awake and then they die. I mean, we're not sure why. We don't even know why we sleep. Stay awake long enough and you'll die. Let's see. By age 60, you will have lost half your taste buds. If saliva cannot dissolve something, you cannot taste it. If it can't dissolve it, it can't create a sensation. So then we're not going to have a perception. And by the way, our mouths are not all wired the same. Makes me crazy when someone says, here, try these chicken livers. They're great. And I say, no, I don't like them. No, but I do. You got to try them. Well, your tongue is wired to like chicken livers. My tongue is wired to gag at chicken livers. I mean, let people like what they like. It's okay. Since the existence of the internet, fewer people claim to be religious. Chewing gum helps your memory to receive a higher test score. You know what? That's more complicated than that. That has more to do with with state-dependent learning, and we'll talk about that in another show. As a matter of fact, our next show we'll talk about how to get better scores and grades on almost anything using Professor Erick's absolutely stupendous method of learning. Let's see. Excessive stress can alter brain cells, structure, and function. Yes, they can. And it makes them produce hormones that makes you feel bad, but it also motivates you to fix it. If you fake a smile, even when you're in a bad mood, that smile will help you feel better and therefore make you happy. You know what? That works. I've done it. I mean, it feels weird when you're doing it, but do it. The next time you're really unhappy, you're having a bad day, fake a smile. Fake a whole bunch of them. You will feel better. It's part of our wiring. When we smile, something happens neurologically. And I'll save the rest of the factoids for next time. There is a Facebook page called Psychology's Outer Limits. It's psychology with an S on the end. Outer is O-U-T-E-R, and then limits with an S. It's all one word. If you search for it, you'll find it. If not, just send an email to livepsych@mail.com, and I'll send you a link that you can click on. And you can follow me there, and I'll try to put some cool stuff up weekly. And I think that's it. I have really enjoyed my first meeting with you, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. I hope you have a fantastic week, and smile. This is Professor Erick Williams. Have a great night.